written. So I think we'll be able to enjoy that today. But I'll give a little bit of background first. Genesis is split up into 10 different genealogies, and the final genealogy is the history of Jacob's family. And this story has two main characters. There's Joseph, who's like the main character, and there's also Judah, who's the secondary main character. And you might wonder, why is there two main characters? We don't really talk about Judah being a main character of this part of Joseph's life. But there's a really good reason. And there's like a whole chapter for Judah as well, but we don't typically read it because it's a very strange chapter. But the reason why Joseph and Judah are the main characters is because the book of Genesis is the history of how the nation of Israel started, and it ends with Jacob blessing his sons, and he gives extra blessings to Judah and additional blessings to Joseph's two sons. And these two tribes become the biggest tribes in Israel. And so when the nation is split, the southern half is Judah, and so Judah dominates the southern part of the nation, and Joseph's two sons dominate the northern part of Israel. So it's very interesting. But I'll begin reading the story of Joseph's life. So when Joseph was 17 years old, he used to shepherd with his brothers, and his brothers despised him, and there were two reasons why they didn't like him. The first reason was Joseph gave a bad report to his father about his brothers. And we don't know if his report was true or false, but it probably didn't matter, because the second reason why his brothers hated him was because his father loved Joseph more than any of his brothers. And he made him a special tunic, a coat of many colors. And when his brothers saw this, they hated Joseph, and they couldn't speak civilly to him. They couldn't have a normal conversation. And there was a third thing that kind of just broke down all the relationships, and this was Joseph's dreams. One day Joseph had a dream that he and his brothers were bundling wheat, and Joseph's brothers' wheat bundles bowed down to his wheat bundle, and he shared this with his brothers, and his brothers are like, "What are you trying to say? Are you trying to say you're going to rule over us? You're going to reign over us?" And then he has a second dream that the sun, moon, and stars all bow down to Joseph himself. And he tells this to his father and his brothers, and his father's even kind of apprehensive. He's like, "Really? Am I and your mother and your brothers going to bow down to you?" That's kind of interesting. But his brothers hated him for that. But his father remembered that these dreams had happened. And so one day, Joseph's brothers were out shepherding in the land of Shechem, and Jacob told Joseph, "Hey, go check up on your brothers and tell me what's happening over there." And so he goes to try to find his brothers. He can't find them. Turns out they're even farther out. They're like 50 miles away. And so he's hiking all the way to find his brothers, and they see him in the distance coming, probably because he's wearing his special tunic. And they plotted to put him to death. They said, "Look, the dreamer is coming. Let's kill him and put him in the pit. And we'll just say a wild animal ate him, and then we'll see what happens to his dreams." Yeah. There was like a random dude who pointed where his brothers were. Um, it was like a few sentences, but it's pretty funny. But Reuben overheard that his brothers wanted to kill Joseph, and he said, "No, let's not put him to death. We must not kill. Let's just put him in the pit and don't lay hands on him." And he'd said this because he wanted to save Joseph. But I think it's funny that he said, we should not kill, because in the area where they were shepherding, Simeon and Levi massacred a whole city several chapters earlier. So it's just, these guys are not great people. And so as soon as Joseph visited his brothers, oh yes, yes? Yes, Reuben was the oldest brother. Yes, he would have probably received the blame, and he does get worried about that because when they sell Joseph into slavery, he's like, what am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to go home without Joseph? So they throw Joseph in a pit, and they're probably going to kill him anyway because Reuben's not there, and they're probably plotting to just kill him anyway. And Judah sees some Ishmaelite traders who are trading some gums down to Egypt, and he says, let's not kill Joseph, let's sell him to them. And so they sell him for 20 shekels, which, if they split him amongst themselves, is about 3 months of work. And Reuben comes back and he's upset. He's like, what am I supposed to do? We can't go home without Joseph. I'm responsible for Joseph because he's the oldest. And so they devised a little trick. They had his coat, they stole his coat, and they killed a baby goat and dipped the coat in the baby goat's blood, and they sent it to their father. And Jacob sees the coat, and they said, oh, we found this. Do you think you could identify it? Is it your son Joseph's? And he said, yes, this is Joseph's. And he tears his clothes, and he goes into mourning, and he says, I'm going to just mourn until I die, until I go down into the land of Sheol. And I find this to be interesting because Joseph, he was pretty tricky when he was younger, and he's kind of getting a taste of his own medicine because when he was younger, he also tricked his father by killing a baby goat. He tricked his father to receive Esau's blessing. But now we're in Genesis 39. I'm going to skip over the chapter about Judah, but I'll maybe mention it a little bit in this chapter because I think it's going to be relevant. So Joseph had been taken down into Egypt, and he was sold to be a slave to Potiphar, who was one of the chief officials of Pharaoh. He was a captain of the guard, so he had authority over the army and over the prisons. He's probably like top 5 most important person in Egypt. But the Lord was with Joseph when he served for Potiphar, and he became very successful. And Potiphar noticed that, and he kept on adding to Joseph's responsibilities until Joseph became the lord of Potiphar's house. And Potiphar didn't have to worry about a single thing. He didn't have to think about anything that was happening in his house because he knew Joseph was going to take care of it. In fact, it even says he only just thought about his food, didn't even think about anything else. So Joseph learned how to be responsible and take care of everything that Potiphar had. And the Lord blessed Joseph, and it says, I think this is funny, he blessed everything that Potiphar had, indoors and outdoors. And so I think that's just a funny detail. But Joseph, he was very strong and handsome, and Potiphar's wife also noticed Joseph, and she tried to take him aside and say, lie with me. But he refused, and she would do this day after day, and he would always refuse. And Joseph's response was, look, Potiphar doesn't know what's happening in his house. I take care of everything. He doesn't know really what's going on here because he's trusted me with all that he has. And so I'm the most responsible person there is here. And, I can't betray his trust because that would be sinning against God. And so Joseph understands his responsibility. And I think that's really interesting because in the previous chapter in Genesis 38, it's like a side story about Judah, who is an extremely irresponsible person. And he kind of comes up with the same situation. But he's irresponsible. His sons learn from him and are irresponsible. He commits adultery, and his daughter-in-law commits adultery, and he tries to burn her alive while hiding the fact that he himself committed adultery. So he wasn't taking responsibility for what he'd done. So in that sense, he's very opposite of Joseph. Joseph learned how to take responsibility, whereas Judah did not. He was very not a great person. But Joseph understood he could not betray Potiphar's trust. Even if he did, Potiphar could be oblivious, but he would also be betraying God's trust, and God is not oblivious. But one day, Joseph entered Potiphar's house, and there was no men inside, and he was trying to do some work, but Potiphar's wife snuck up and grabbed his robe and said, "Lie with me," and he ran away. And she called Potiphar's other workers and said, "Look, this is the Hebrew that was brought to us. He tried to lie with me, and as soon as I shouted, he ran away, and I have his cloak now." And so she waited for Potiphar to come home, and she told Potiphar, and he was furious, and he put Joseph to death, right? No. He put him in jail, which I find very interesting because he would have had authority to execute Joseph. He probably had authority to execute other Egyptians, but he didn't execute Joseph, even though Joseph was accused of doing this horrible thing. Yes, I do think God had a hand in saving Joseph. And I could imagine Joseph wasn't feeling too great because he had um, he had honored God. He had done all the right things. He was blessed, and now he's being punished for doing the right thing, and he was thrown in jail, thrown in prison. But his attitude didn't change. And we learn that his attitude didn't change because in jail he was also responsible. And the captain of the prison saw this and started promoting Joseph, and Joseph became in charge of all the prisoners, which I find to be just hilarious because Joseph is a prisoner. But he displayed his responsibility, which is really cool. But yes, God was blessing Joseph because he trusted God. And it says God stayed loyal to Joseph, which I find really interesting. And so one day, two of Pharaoh's officials got sent to prison. They upset Pharaoh somehow. There was the cupbearer and the baker. We don't know how they upset Pharaoh, but Pharaoh got upset, sent them to prison. And Joseph was told to take care of these two guys. And one morning he went to these two men, and they were not looking okay. They were kind of upset. And Joseph's like, "Why are you guys so glum? What happened?" And they said, "Oh, we both have dreamed a bizarre dream, and there's no one here to interpret it for us." And so I guess Egypt, they used to have like special dream interpreters. They didn't really understand what dreams were, but they thought that dreams came from the land of the dead, and that they were some sort of omen from the gods that were gonna like tell them their fate or something, which I find interesting. So I could see why these guys are worried because they were sent to prison. They probably thought they were gonna die, and they've received this dream that they expect is gonna tell them their fate, and they have no one to interpret it for them. And Joseph says, he doesn't say, "I can interpret your dream." He said, "Only God interprets dreams." So he just denies that people can interpret dreams. But the cupbearer says, "Oh, let me just tell you my dream. Let's see what happens." And his dream isn't too bad. Like I wouldn't be like upset if I dreamed this dream. But he said, "I dreamed that there were a grapevine, and on the vine there were 3 branches, and there was grapes that blossomed and clustered and grew. And I took some grapes and squeezed them into the cup that I was holding that turns out to be Pharaoh's cup. And I passed it along to Pharaoh, and he drank. And then I woke up." And that's not a bad dream. That's a pretty good dream. He could probably deduce what's going to happen. And Joseph says, "The 3 branches are 3 days, and in 3 days, Pharaoh's going to lift up your head and restore you to your old position, and you'll continue to be a cupbearer. But he also adds, because I've given you a positive interpretation, please don't forget about me. Please tell me, tell about me to Pharaoh, because I was kidnapped from the land of the Hebrews, and I was unjustly put into prison. And so please rescue me. I haven't done anything wrong. And so the baker who's sitting right there, he sees that Joseph gave a good interpretation to the dream, and he's like, oh, I'll tell you my dream. And his dream's a little bit stranger. He dreamed that he had 3 baskets on top of his head with white bread, and on the top basket there were some pastries for Pharaoh, and birds came and started pecking at the bread and eating the bread, and then he woke up. And Joseph kind of goes along with the same interpretation. Oh, the 3 baskets are for 3 days, and in 3 days Pharaoh's going to lift up your head from off of you and hang you from a tree, which means to be impaled on the tree, and the birds are going to eat your flesh. And so that's a pretty disgusting thing. But the Egyptians would execute people in this horrifying way because they thought that they thought that their soul wouldn't find peace in the afterlife, and so that's why they did this, as opposed to mummification. But on the 3rd day, it was Pharaoh's birthday, and those things came to pass, but the cupbearer forgot about Joseph. And so Joseph was imprisoned for 2 more years. And by now, he's like 30 years old, so he's been serving for around 13 years. One day, Pharaoh had a dream, and his dream is very bizarre. He had a double dream with fat cows and skinny cows, and fat grain and skinny grain, and he was very perturbed by his dreams. He wanted to know what they meant, and so he tried to find all the experts in Egypt and all the priests, the diviners, and try and interpret his dream. And they probably tried to give him a positive interpretation, because if you give the Pharaoh a negative interpretation, he's probably not going to be happy with you. But Pharaoh wasn't satisfied with any of their interpretations, because I think he kind of understood the dreams were leading to something that wasn't going to be good. And he explains his dreams, and he kind of embellishes the negative sides of his dreams. But the head cupbearer remembers Joseph, and he said, oh, there was this guy who interpreted my dream. You should bring him. Maybe he can interpret yours. And so Pharaoh sends for Joseph. They shave him, give him new clothes, tidy him up to meet Pharaoh. And Pharaoh says, there you are. Can you interpret my dream? No one else has been able to. And Joseph says, who can interpret dreams but God? So it's amazing that he says this to Pharaoh. But Pharaoh starts relating his dream. He says, there I was, standing on the bank of the Nile, and rising out of the Nile, I saw 7 well-fattened cows, and they grazed in the pasture. And then 7 other cows rose after them, and they looked awful and thin. I've never seen anything as bad as them in the whole land of Egypt. Then the thin, awful-looking cows ate up the first 7 fat cows, and they went down inside of them, but no one would know it because the skinny cows looked the same as they were at the beginning. And I woke up, and then I fell back asleep, and I saw 7 ears of grain, and they looked full and good. And then 7 shriveled ears sprouted up, scorched by the east wind. And the 7 thin ears swallowed up the 7 good ears. And I woke up. I don't know what that must have looked like, the 7 thin ears swallowing up the fat ears of grain. But they kind of feel like riddles to me, like riddle dreams. And these dreams are recorded twice, but the second time Pharaoh tells them himself, and he kind of embellishes, these cows are like the worst looking cows I've ever seen in the whole world. And when they ate them, They look the same. They look disgusting. So he probably understands that this dream is not about something good. And so Joseph interprets the dream for him. He says, God has declared to Pharaoh what he's about to do. He received 2 dreams, which means God has solidified it, and he's going to bring it about quickly. And we all know what the dreams mean. 7 years, the 7 fat cows are for 7 good years, 7 skinny cows are for 7 bad years. And Joseph, once he interprets the dream, he starts immediately rattling off a list of things that the Pharaoh should do to prepare for the 7 years of famine. He says, there's going to be 7 years of plenty. You should appoint officials to gather food and put them in stores. And when the famine comes, people will come and buy the food, so we'll just resell the food back. And so he lists off a bunch of things, and he says, you should find a really intelligent and wise person to take care of this for you. Hint, hint. And Pharaoh says, who else has the Spirit of God in them? We should just let you do it because you have the Spirit of God. Who could be more intelligent? Who could be more wise than someone who has God's Spirit in them? And so he appoints Joseph to become the prime minister, and there's a whole event for him. He gets the ring. He gets paraded around. He gets married in. He goes on a joyride. And he gets a new name too. And during the 7 years of plenty, Joseph piled up grain like the sand of the sea, a tremendous quantity, so that they stopped measuring it, for it was too much to measure. So it was just a lot of grain. And he had 2 sons. And the 7 years come to an end, and the famine is all throughout Egypt and all throughout the whole world, and it's just a terrible famine. And so the people are like, oh, we've run out of food, what do we do? And Pharaoh says, go talk to Joseph. He knows what to do. And Joseph resells the food to the Egyptians so that they can prosper. And I think the Egyptians, run out of money at some point, and so they sell all their land to Pharaoh, and so Pharaoh starts owning all the land in Egypt, which I find very interesting. But now we come to the point where Joseph reunites with his brothers because the famine is throughout everywhere. And Jacob and his family are suffering from this famine. They run out of food. They have money. And Jacob says, oh, I've heard that there's food in Egypt. You 10 brothers, go down to Egypt and buy us some food. And so they go down to Egypt with the silver that they had. And I think they find Joseph there. But they don't recognize Joseph, but Joseph recognizes them. And they've said, oh, we've come, our father's very old, we've come to buy some food. And Joseph gives them like a party, and they're like, whoa, why is this prime minister of Egypt, he's the second in command of Egypt, why is he giving us a party? And he feeds them, and he gives them food, and they pay him, and they go on their way, and they find out that he snuck the silver back in their bags, and they're like, oh, this isn't good. We were trying to pay him, and we found that we didn't pay. That's kind of uncomfortable. But they bring their food back to Jacob, and they tell Jacob, here's all the food, and we also have the money still. And Jacob's like, that's not good. That's a bad thing. You should bring all of our best gifts that we have, which is just like almonds and myrrh and some spices. And he says, bring them back to this prime minister and pay him back, because that's not right. But I think they go back after they eat all their food, and they have to go back and buy some more food too. But they go back and they see Joseph again, and Joseph says, is this all your brothers? Is this everyone? I think he said that the first time, and they're like, oh, we've got another brother, but we didn't bring him along because our father loves him. And if I remember right, Joseph said, don't come back until till you have this brother. Um, I'm trying to remember the order of this story now because they visit like three separate times. Um, yeah, so I guess the second time they bring Benjamin with them, I guess that's why Jacob was like, don't go back because he said don't go back until you bring Benjamin. But they ran out of food, and he says, okay, fine, you can go back, you can take Benjamin, but please bring him back because that's the only son that he loves, which is kind of depressing for the other guys. But they go along with Joseph or with Benjamin, and um, he throws another party for them, and he gives them food, and he sends them back home. And as they're trying to get back home, some of Pharaoh's army chases after them. They're like, oh, one of you stole Pharaoh's cup or the prime minister's cup. And they're like, uh-oh, none of us did. We wouldn't do that. We'd be stupid. He threw a party for us. Why would we steal from him? And so they start opening up their bags, and they come to Benjamin's bag, and they find the cup because Joseph had snuck it in there. And they're like, oh, we're going to have to imprison this kid. He stole from the prime minister. And Joseph's brothers are like, they don't know what to do because they think their father would die if they came back without Benjamin because he only loves Benjamin now. And so Judah kind of grows up and takes responsibility for something that he didn't do. And he said, I will take his place. I will go to prison for Benjamin, and we'll sort it out. And so Judah is taken to prison, and they go back home, and they eat all their food. I don't know how long he's in prison for, but Jacob and the brothers eat all their food. But they come back, and I think Jacob, I guess Jacob comes with them at this point. It might be good just to read from it. Let's find it. What are we? I think like Genesis 44, 45. Genesis 44. Yeah. Yeah, because he gave them back the silver, and they're like, oh no. I think 44 is the story about the stolen cup. No, I'm just gonna read it. Starting 44. I think this story's awesome. The narrative is just so beautifully written, like I mentioned. So I'm just gonna read it. Now Joseph gave these instructions to the steward of the house: fill the men's sacks with as much food as they can carry, and put each man's silver in the mouth of his sack. Then put my cup, the silver one, in the mouth of the youngest one's sack, along with the silver for his grain. And he did as Joseph said. As morning dawned, the men were sent on their way with their donkeys. They had not gone far from the city when Joseph said to his steward, go after these men at once, and when you catch up with them, say, why have you repaid good with evil? Isn't this the cup my master drinks from, and also uses for divination? This is a wicked thing you've done. Yeah, I don't think Joseph did divination. When he caught up with them, he repeated these words to them. But they said to him, why does my lord say such things? Far be it from your servants to do anything like that. We even brought back to you from the land of Canaan the silver we found inside the mouths of our sacks. So why would we steal silver or gold from your master's house? If any of your servants is found to have it, he will die, and the rest of us will become my lord's slaves. Oh, I forgot about that. Benjamin's going to be put to death here. Very well then, he said. Let it be as you say. Whoever is found to have it will become my slave, The rest of you will be free from blame." Each of them quickly lowered his sack to the ground and opened it. Then the steward proceeded to search, beginning with the oldest and ending with the youngest. Kind of drawing out the drama here. And the cup was found in Benjamin's sack. At this, they tore their clothes. Then they all loaded their donkey and returned to the city. Joseph was still in the house when Judah and his brothers came in, and they threw themselves to the ground before him. Joseph said to them, "What is this you've done? Don't you know that a man like me can find things out by divination?" Oh, he divined it. "What can we say to my lord?" Judah replied. "What can we say? How can we prove our innocence? God has uncovered your servant's guilt. We are now my lord's slaves, we ourselves, and the one who was found to have the cup." But Joseph said, "Far be it from me to do such thing. Only the man who stole the cup will be my slave, and the rest of you can go back to your father." But Judah went up to him and said, "Pardon your servant, my lord. Let me speak a word to my lord. Do not be angry with your servant, though you are equal to Pharaoh himself. My lord asked his servants, 'Do you have a father or a brother?' And we answered, 'We have an aged father, and there is a young son born to him of old age. His brother is dead, and he's the only one of his mother's sons left, and his father loves him.' Then you said to his servants, 'Bring him down to me so I can see him for myself.' And we said to my lord, 'The boy cannot leave his father, for if he leaves him, his father will die.' But you told your servants, 'Unless your younger brother comes down with you, you will not see my face again.' When we went back to your servant, my father, we told him what my lord had said. And our father said, 'Go back and buy a little more food.' But we said, 'We can't go back. Only if your youngest brother is with us will we go.'" It's getting a little repetitive here. Okay. "Your servant, my father, said to us, 'You know that my wife bore me 2 sons. One of them went away from me, and I said, "He's surely been torn to pieces." I have not seen him since. If you take this one from me too, and if anything comes to harm to him, you will bring my gray head down to the grave in misery. So now, if the boy is not with us when I go back to your servant my father, and if my father, whose life is closely bound up with the boy's life, sees that the boy isn't there, he will die. Your servants will bring the gray head of our father down to the grave in sorrow. Your servant guaranteed the boy's safety to my father. I said, if I don't bring him back to you, I will bear the blame before you, my father, all my life. Now then, please let your servant remain and have my lord's slave in place of the boy. And let the boy return with his father. How can I go back to my father if the boy's not with me? No, do not let me see the misery that would come on my father. And at this point, Joseph can't hold it in any longer. He's been keeping it a secret from them. He used to go off and just cry because he knew that those were his brothers who tried to kill him. But now he can't control himself anymore. He sees that they've changed. He sees that they can take responsibility now and that they care about their dad and they care about their brother. And he finally reveals himself to them. He said, have everyone leave my presence. And so there was no one with Joseph when he made himself known to his brothers. And he wept loudly that the Egyptians heard them. And Pharaoh's household heard about it. And Joseph said to his brothers, I'm Joseph. Is my father still living? But his brothers weren't able to answer him because they were terrified. And I don't know why they must have believed that they actually killed him. I guess, okay, so they sold him into slavery. They probably thought he was either dead or still a slave. There's no way that they could recognize Joseph. And so they're just probably terribly confused. They're like, how does he know Joseph? What's going on here? And Joseph said to his brothers, come close to me. And when they'd done so, he said, I'm your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now, there has been famine in the land, and for the next 5 years, there will be no plowing or reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So then it was not you who sent me here, but God. He made me father to Pharaoh, lord of his entire household and ruler of all Egypt. Now hurry back to my father and say to him, 'This is what your son Joseph says. God has made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me, don't delay. You shall live in the region of Goshen and be near me, you and your children and grandchildren, your flocks and herds, all that you have. I'll provide for you there, because 5 years of famine are still to come. Otherwise, you and your household and all who belongs to you will become destitute. You can see for yourselves, and so can my brother Benjamin, that it is really I who am speaking to you. Tell my father all the honor accorded me in Egypt and about everything you've seen, and bring my father down here quickly.' And they threw their arms around. Okay. Then he threw his arms around his brother Benjamin and wept. And Benjamin embraced him, weeping. And he kissed all his brothers and wept over them. Afterwards, his brothers talked with him. When the news reached Pharaoh's palace that Joseph's brothers had come, Pharaoh and all his officials were pleased. Pharaoh said to Joseph, 'Tell your brothers, do this. Load your animals and return to the land of Canaan, and bring your father and your families back to me. I'll give you the best of the land of Egypt, and you can enjoy the fat of the land.' You're also directed to tell them, 'Take some carts from Egypt for your children and your wives, and get your father and come. Never mind about your belongings, because the best of all Egypt will be yours.' And so the sons of Israel did this. Joseph gave them carts and provisions and new clothing, but to Benjamin he gave 300 shekels of silver and 5 sets of clothes. Hey, that's pretty good. And this is what he sent to his father: 10 donkeys loaded with the best things of Egypt, 10 donkeys loaded with grain and bread and other provisions for the journey. And he sent his brothers away. And he said, 'Don't quarrel along the way.' And so they went back to Canaan, and they told their father, 'Joseph is still alive. In fact, he's the ruler of all Egypt.' And Jacob was stunned. He didn't believe them. But when they told him everything Joseph had said to him, and when he saw the carts Joseph had sent to carry him back, the spirit of their father Jacob revived. And Israel said, 'I'm convinced. My son Joseph is still alive. I will go and see him before I die.' And so they go, and Jacob gets to meet Pharaoh, and Pharaoh says, 'Wow, you're pretty old. How old are you?' And he says, 'I'm 130 years old, but not nearly as old as my fathers. My ancestors used to live way longer.' I think that's a really cool detail in the story. But yeah, they live in Egypt, and they have success in Egypt, and this is the beginning of the nation of Israel, and they'll grow in Egypt, and they'll eventually become enslaved in Egypt. But Jacob blesses his 2 brothers. Jacob blesses his 2 sons. He blesses Judah, and he blesses Joseph's sons. And I kind of want to read the blessing of Judah, because it's very interesting. Yeah, he blesses all of his sons. And I don't think every son gets a good blessing. I think some of them get some pretty bizarre blessings. I'm reading here, Simon and Levi are brothers. Their swords are weapons of violence. Let me not enter their council. Let me not join their assembly, for they've killed men in their anger and hamstrung oxen as they pleased. Cursed be their anger so fierce and their fury. I'll scatter them. It's not a great blessing. But they're the 2 that massacred that whole city. So I guess it kind of makes sense. And then Genesis 49, verse 8. Judah, your brothers will praise you. Your hand will be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's son will bow down to you. You are a lion's cub, Judah. You return from the prey, my son. Like a lion, he crouches and lies down. Like a lioness, who dares to rouse him? The scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until he to whom it belongs shall come, and the obedience of the nations shall be his. He will tether his donkey to a vine, his colt to the choicest branch. He will wash his garments in wine, his robes in the blood of grapes. His eyes will be darker than wine, his teeth whiter than milk. Zebulun will live by the seashore. Oh, he's going on to the next son. Well, this blessing, what does it remind us of? Kind of reminds us of Jesus. It's talking about someone who's going to rule all nations. All nations will obey him. He's talking about Jesus. I wonder. I don't know if Judah knows this, but I'm sure Jacob knows this, because the patriarchs, they all knew about Jesus, which is amazing. It's so cool seeing in Genesis the story of how God built up the nation of Israel and how Jesus is going to deliver everyone through this nation. So it's amazing how from the very beginning God had this plan. But I love the story of Joseph's life. I'm glad that we get to read it and talk about it. So the character trait that I like about Joseph is that he learned how to be responsible. And even though he went through all sorts of terrible situations, he had a good attitude, and it made him stronger. And so sometimes we talk about, how come people turn out the way they do? Is it because of nature? Is it because of nurture? What's the deal here? And I don't think it's any of those things. I think it's the heart of the individual. If your attitude is godly, if you go through bad situations, you'll become stronger because you're leaning on God, and God will make you stronger. So yeah, that's my lesson. Thank you. Yes. Yes. Yeah, Joseph forgave his brothers. When Jacob died, I think his brothers were worried that he was going to seek revenge again, because they're like, "Oh, Dad's dead. No one's stopping him now." But he reminded them, "No, everything's in the past. It's all forgiven." And I think that's where it's either that place where he says the famous phrase, or maybe the time before, that what the brothers had done for evil, God worked out to be good. And so that's a great attitude to have, that God is always in control, no matter what bad things happen. Thank you.